My name is Hannah Miles. I'm 34, a senior creative director at a branding firm in downtown Seattle. I'm the oldest daughter in a family where reliability is expected but never praised. My younger sister, Chloe, has always been the center of gravity, drawing attention, sympathy, and affection as effortlessly as she breathes. In our family, Chloe was the heart, I was the backbone. She made the messes. I cleaned them up. That's just how it was. So maybe I shouldn't have been shocked that when Chloe got pregnant with my boyfriend's child, everyone in my family knew before I did. And, somehow, they had all agreed that my birthday dinner was the right moment to let me in on the secret. A celebration for me, hijacked to spotlight her. The evening began with small talk and champagne flutes clinking at Merriweather's, a warm, wood-accented restaurant nestled in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood. It was Chloe's idea to hold the dinner here. "You deserve somewhere special," she had said, with that sugary voice that made people melt. She was already seated when I arrived, next to David, my boyfriend of nearly 5 years. She wore a flowy emerald dress and that familiar air of practiced innocence. David stood to greet me with a kiss on the cheek. "You look incredible," he said, softly. I smiled, though something inside me recoiled. There was a strange buzz in the room, as if everyone had memorized a line from a script I hadn't been given. My parents were in their usual semi-formal outfits. My mom beamed at Chloe, not me, when I walked in. My dad hugged me quickly, then immediately returned to discussing property taxes with Chloe like they shared an inside joke. And yet, I smiled. Because that's what you do when you're Hannah Miles, the dependable one, the strong one, the one who keeps things from falling apart. Dinner unfolded with pleasant conversations, wine flowing easily, and Chloe, always Chloe, taking up the air in the room. I noticed her hand occasionally brushing against David's arm, the glances they exchanged when they thought no one was looking. I dismissed it. I'd been dismissing things for months. Then came dessert. The waiter brought out a tiramisu with a single gold candle, and everyone sang, some half-heartedly, others a bit too enthusiastically. I was about to make a wish when Chloe tapped her spoon against her glass. "I have something to share," she said, flashing that sweet, trembling smile. The table fell silent, like it had been rehearsed. "I'm pregnant," she announced, placing a gentle hand over her stomach. "And David is the father." My body didn't collapse. It didn't shake. It went still, like a lake gone quiet before a storm. I scanned the faces around the table, one by one. No one looked surprised. Not my mother, who reached over to squeeze Chloe's hand. Not my father, who nodded solemnly. Not David, who stared into his lap. Everyone knew. Except me. They had all known. They had planned this. Chloe's announcement wasn't just spontaneous, it was orchestrated. The way my mother beamed at her. The way my dad had made sure she sat beside David. The way they all turned toward me now, waiting to see how I'd react like it was a scene in a play. "Well," I said, my voice level, "congratulations." Chloe blinked in surprise, clearly expecting a different reaction. David's jaw tightened. My mother tilted her head with concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I just thought it was time," Chloe offered. "And since we're all together tonight." "You mean, since it's my birthday," I said quietly. She didn't answer. I stood and adjusted the hem of my blazer. "If you'll excuse me." I made my way to the restroom without stumbling. My heels clicked rhythmically across the hardwood floor. The second the door shut behind me, I looked into the mirror. I saw a woman not broken but hollowed. I had been the last to know about the most humiliating betrayal of my life. Not just because David had cheated on me with my own sister, but because the people I called family had made space for her mistake and didn't even consider my place in it. They didn't even think I deserved a warning. I touched my cheek, still warm from where David had kissed it earlier. Not out of love, I realize now, but out of guilt. When I returned, no one spoke. Chloe looked like she was on the verge of tears. David looked like he wanted to disappear. My mother patted the seat beside her as if inviting me back into the farce. "Thank you for dinner," I said, looking only at my parents. "I'll be in touch." "Hannah, please." David stood. "Can we talk?" "Not tonight," I said. Chloe opened her mouth. Don't. Outside, the air was cool, sharp, honest. I walked a few blocks to my car in silence, my heart surprisingly steady. Betrayal cuts differently when it comes layered with performance, with the choreography of a family more worried about preserving peace than honoring truth. But in that silence, a thought emerged with clarity. They had all chosen Chloe. Now, it was time I chose me. Have you ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever gone through something similar, hit like, subscribe to the channel, because this story is just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on Kara's pull-out couch, watching the digital clock on her wall blink its silent, relentless rhythm. 1:42 a.m. 3:17 a.m. 5:04 a.m. The streetlight outside cast long shadows across the ceiling, stretching and shifting as if echoing the hollow ache in my chest. Kara had wrapped me in blankets and made chamomile tea. She hadn't asked questions, just held my hand and let me sit in silence. That was the kindest thing anyone had done for me all day. By morning, I still hadn't cried. It was like the tears were trapped behind some dam of disbelief. Not disbelief at the betrayal itself, I believed that too easily, but at how orchestrated it had been. How deliberate. They knew. They all knew. And they let me walk into that restaurant, let me smile, make toasts, pose for pictures, all the while waiting for the curtain to rise on Chloe's grand reveal. My own family had used my birthday as a stage, and I was the unsuspecting fool at center. At 7 a.m., I slipped quietly into Kara's kitchen and started the coffee. She came out minutes later in an oversized hoodie, hair a tangled halo around her sleepy face. "You didn't sleep," she said softly, not a question. "No," I replied. "But I don't feel tired, just numb." She sat down, pulled her knees up to her chest. "Want to talk about it?" I shook my head. "Not yet, but can I stay here for a bit?" "For as long as you want." I nodded, grateful. Kara had been my best friend since freshman year at Northwestern. We'd survived college breakups, job layoffs, and her disastrous starter marriage. She didn't need explanations. She just needed to know when to be there, and that morning, she was. Later, as the sun pushed its way through the blinds, I opened my phone. 17 unread messages. 5 missed calls. I didn't even have to look to know who they were from. David. Chloe. My mother. A family group chat titled Sunday Roast Plans that now felt like a mockery. I opened none of them. Instead, I opened the Photos app. There it was, my birthday dinner, smiling faces. Chloe leaning into David. My mother clapping. Me in the center, laughing. A perfect life frozen in pixels. I deleted them all. Around noon, Kara left for work, and I sat alone on the couch, my laptop balanced on my knees. I didn't plan to do anything drastic. I wasn't seeking revenge or drama, I just needed clarity. Context. Something that made sense of what I was feeling. I typed Washington state property rights, unmarried couples into Google. Then I typed inheritance loopholes, siblings, and intentional emotional harm family law. I wasn't planning to sue anyone, but I needed to understand. I needed knowledge to fill the void where trust had once lived. That's when I remembered David's lawyer. A man named Stuart Blake, an estate attorney we'd both met at a charity gala last year. He and David had worked together on drafting wills and financial transfers. Chloe had been oddly curious about that at the time. I hadn't thought much of it. But now, I sent Stuart an email. Professional. Polite. I asked if he could confirm whether David had recently made any significant changes to his assets, particularly if Chloe was involved. I wasn't expecting a reply anytime soon, but not 20 minutes later, I received one. Hi Hannah. I'm surprised to hear from you, but I hope you're well. I can't disclose confidential details unless authorized, but I will say this. If something feels off, follow your instincts. That's all I can advise at the moment. Best, Stuart. My stomach flipped. There was more. There was definitely more. I stood, paced the small living room, adrenaline rising for the first time in days. I felt awake. Alive. Not just hurt, but sharp. The betrayal was no longer just personal, it was layered, calculated. Chloe hadn't just slept with David. She'd planned something. And my family had been either too blind or too complicit to stop her. I opened Chloe's Instagram. She had posted a photo that morning. Her hand resting gently on her still flat stomach, captioned, "Blessings come in unexpected ways." Over 100 likes. Comments from mutual friends congratulating her. Heart emojis from distant cousins. No mention of David. No mention of me. I set the phone down, breath catching. She was already rewriting the narrative. I knew that move well. Chloe had always been good at controlling perception. As a child, she could cry on cue and convince our mother I'd taken her toys. As a teenager, she'd flirt her way out of trouble while I sat grounded. Now, she was spinning a public story of single motherhood, of divine timing and soft miracles. And I was just collateral damage. I took a long sip of coffee, staring out the window at the gray Seattle sky. Then I grabbed my notebook. Page 1, I wrote. Things I know. 1. Chloe is pregnant. 2. David is the father. 3. My family knew and didn't tell me. 4. Chloe and David are hiding something more. Then I flipped to a clean page. Things I need to find out. 1. Has David transferred any assets to Chloe? 2. Was this pregnancy accidental or part of a larger plan? 3. Who else knew and when? 4. Why announce it on my birthday? I stared at that last question the longest. There was only one answer, because they didn't think I mattered enough to shield. That was the hardest truth of all. Not that I'd been betrayed, but that none of them thought it would hurt me enough to matter. By the end of the week, I couldn't stand looking at my phone anymore. The flood of messages never stopped. Chloe begging me to understand, David wanting to talk like adults, and my mother swinging between guilt-tripped sympathy and barely disguised defense of Chloe. I turned off notifications. But silence didn't mean peace. It was Kara who reminded me that my Aunt Margaret lived just an hour outside the city. "You need fresh air, hon," she said gently, watching me stare blankly at my half-eaten toast. "And maybe someone older. Someone who doesn't think Chloe walks on water." Margaret wasn't really my aunt. She was my late father's cousin, but she'd always insisted we call her aunt. A retired attorney who'd spent her career fighting estate fraud and family disputes, she was the only person in my orbit who'd once taken my side during a long-ago argument with Chloe back when no one else would even listen. I trusted her in a way I no longer trusted anyone else in my family. So I packed an overnight bag, turned off my phone completely, and drove toward her small craftsman home in Bainbridge Island. She opened the door before I even knocked. "You're thinner than usual," she said, squinting at me. "And paler. Come in. I've made chicken soup." I smiled for the first time in days. Over a hot bowl in her wood-paneled kitchen, I told her everything. The dinner, the announcement, the silence from my parents before and after, Chloe's online post, David's guilt-ridden texts. I didn't dramatize anything, and I didn't cry. I just laid it all out. Margaret listened in silence, her hands folded on the table, the only sound the slow tick of the wall clock above the stove. When I finished, she leaned back. "It wasn't an accident," she said flatly. "I know. She's always wanted what you had," Margaret continued, matter of fact. "Even if she didn't want it, she needed to win it." I nodded. "And now she has it. And somehow I'm the one who feels like I've lost everything." Margaret looked at me carefully. "Hannah, you haven't lost yourself. But you are standing at a crossroads." I waited. "You can either walk away from this mess, hurt but intact, rebuild your life, or you can dig. Learn the whole truth. And possibly find out just how deep this betrayal goes." I swallowed. "And if I'm not sure I want the truth?" Margaret stirred her tea. "Then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if they ever got away with it." That night, I lay awake in the guest bedroom she'd set up for me, watching the moonlight pool across the hardwood floor. I thought about what Margaret said about crossroads. I'd always chosen the quiet route. the root that kept peace, even if it meant swallowing pain. But this time, the peace was poisoned. The silence wasn't noble. It was complicity. I rose early the next morning and knocked on Margaret's study door. "Do you still have contacts in financial law?" She arched a brow. "What do you need?" "Someone discreet, someone who can look into David's recent transactions." She smiled faintly. "That, my dear, I can arrange." 3 days later, Margaret handed me a manila folder. "It's all legal," she said. "He changed beneficiaries on one of his insurance policies in late August. Guess who the new primary is?" "Chloe," I said, before even opening it. "And 2 weeks before your birthday," Margaret added. "He made a sizable cash withdrawal, 40,000. No paper trail after that." I sat down hard. "Jesus." Margaret leaned forward. "If she's already making herself out to be the victim, the poor, pregnant sister abandoned by her cruel family, you can bet this is more than a fling. It's a setup, emotional, maybe financial. Can I stop them? Not yet. But you can document. Build your case, and be ready." That night, I returned to Kara's apartment with the folder tucked in my coat like it was evidence in a trial. In a way, it was. I opened my notebook again. New findings. 5. David transferred insurance beneficiary to Chloe. 6. $40,000 cash withdrawal, unaccounted for. 7. Chloe's narrative is gaining public sympathy. I felt myself shift into another version of Menat, the betrayed girlfriend, not the discarded sister, but the strategist. I'd learned from Margaret that power wasn't in loud confrontation. It was in knowledge. It was in preparation. I wasn't going to storm into Chloe's apartment and scream. I wasn't going to beg David for answers. I was going to do something far more dangerous. I was going to wait. And when the time came, I would make sure the truth didn't just come out, it landed. So hard they'd feel it echo. As I climbed into bed that night, I thought of my childhood self, always the rule follower, the peacekeeper, the good daughter. That version of me would have accepted the apology, would have stayed quiet to keep the family intact. But that version was gone. She had been broken at a dinner table with a gold candle burning on top of a tiramisu. What rose in her place was someone much more dangerous. Someone who had nothing left to lose except silence. The following week, an ivory envelope slid through the mail slot at Kara's apartment. It had no return address, just my name in Chloe's distinct, round handwriting. For a moment, I considered tossing it unopened into the recycling bin. But curiosity, or perhaps some quiet hunger for answers, got the better of me. Inside was a formal invitation. My mother's handwriting this time. Family dinner. Saturday. 6 p.m. Home. No explanation. No apology. No request. Just an expectation. As if what had happened between us could be erased with pot roast and polite conversation. Kara scoffed when I showed her. "You'd think they'd bake you a cake and ask you to be godmother while they're at it." "I think they want to pretend it never happened," I said, folding the card carefully. "Or worse, to tell me why it did and expect me to understand." "You're not seriously thinking of going, are you?" I didn't answer. Because I was. Not to forgive. Not to make peace. But to observe. Saturday came with gray skies and a drizzle that painted the sidewalks in reflections. I dressed plainly: jeans, a navy sweater, boots, no makeup. I wanted them to see my face as it was. No armor. No mask. My childhood home looked unchanged. The same blue shutters, the same creaky porch swing. But the warmth I used to feel as I stepped through that front door was gone, replaced by a cold awareness that I was entering enemy territory. Chloe greeted me first. She was glowing, or at least trying to. Hair curled, lips tinted a soft rose, a pale blue maternity dress hugging a stomach that still showed nothing. "Hannah," she breathed, like we hadn't seen each other in years instead of mere days. "I'm glad you came." "I'm sure you are," I replied, walking past her. In the dining room, the table was set for 7 parents: Chloe, David, me, and a couple of extended relatives. My mother hovered by the roast in the kitchen, visibly flustered but trying to smile. My father gave me a nod, as if that could stand in for actual conversation. David stood awkwardly near the fireplace, holding a glass of wine. He looked thinner, or maybe just weighed down. When our eyes met, he stepped forward. "Hannah," he said, voice low. "Thank you for coming. I've been trying to." "You've said enough," I cut in. "Tonight, let's just eat." Dinner was served with practiced small talk. No one dared mention the elephant in the room until Chloe reached for the butter and sighed dramatically. "I know this is strange," she began, "but I really think we can all move forward. As a family." My fork paused midair. David and we didn't mean for it to happen. But now that it has, maybe it's fate, and maybe this baby is what brings us closer again. Closer? I nearly laughed. But I swallowed it. Instead, I turned to her calmly. "How long?" She blinked. "What? How long were you and David together before you told me?" The table went still. "2. Don't know exactly." "You do know," I said. "So tell me." David set his wine down. "It was about 3 months." I nodded slowly. 3 months. While you were still sleeping in my bed, whispering plans for summer trips. While Chloe was pretending to borrow my sweaters and asking if you and I were talking about marriage. My mother cleared her throat. "Hannah, this isn't helping." "No," I snapped. "What's not helping is pretending this is normal. What's not helping is you hosting a dinner like it's Thanksgiving instead of a reckoning." My father shifted uncomfortably. Chloe's lip trembled. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "But you did hurt me," I replied. "And so did all of you." My gaze swept the table. "You knew, Mom. You knew before my birthday. You let me walk in there blind while the rest of you clinked glasses and waited for the reveal." "I thought it would be easier," she said, eyes downcast. "For who?" No one answered. I stood. "This isn't reconciliation. This is damage control. And I'm done participating in the cover-up." I left the roast half-eaten and walked out into the drizzle. Behind me, no one followed. Back at Kara's apartment, I didn't cry. Instead, I pulled out my notebook again. Dinner notes. David and Chloe. Relationship began at least 3 months ago. Confirmed. My parents were complicit in withholding the truth. Chloe's narrative. Meant to be. Baby brings us together. I flipped to a new page. Plan. 1. Track David's financial patterns further. 2. Speak to Stuart again. Ask about Chloe's legal position. 3. Begin documenting emotional harm texts, recordings if necessary. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. Build your case. But this wasn't just about legalities anymore. It was about reclaiming the truth before they buried it under their version of events. As I tucked the notebook away, my phone buzzed an unknown number. A text. "If you're still looking for answers, meet me tomorrow. 11 a.m. Pike Place. Outside the old bookstore." No name. Just one line that made my pulse spike. The story was shifting again. And this time, I was ready. I arrived at Pike Place Market 15 minutes early, blending into the morning bustle as vendors stacked sunflowers into buckets and tourists gathered to watch fish fly. The gray Seattle sky hung low, damp but not yet raining. I stood by the old brick bookstore at the market's edge, the one with the faded mural and cracked windows, my coat zipped high, hands buried deep in my pockets. I didn't know who I was meeting. The message had no name, no context. But something in its tone had felt urgent. Not threatening, just necessary. At exactly 11 o'clock, a woman in her early 50s approached. Shoulder-length silver-streaked hair, red scarf, leather gloves. She looked around before her eyes landed on me. "Hannah?" "Yes?" She extended a hand. "My name is Evelyn. Evelyn Knox. I used to work with David." I didn't shake her hand. "What do you want?" "To help you. But not here. There's a coffee shop around the corner. Quiet. We can talk." 100 alarms went off in my head. But my instincts weren't screaming danger, just caution. I nodded once and followed. We settled into a back booth at Cafe Vincente, the hum of espresso machines and jazz shielding our conversation from curious ears. Evelyn ordered a black coffee. I didn't order anything. I know you don't trust me, she said gently. But I've been debating whether to come forward for weeks, and after Chloe's post. Well, I saw where this was going. I leaned in slightly. You said you worked with David? I was his financial compliance officer. Quiet role. Mostly reviewing reports and alerting internal counsel if something seemed off. And something has seemed off for months. She slid a folder across the table. I made copies. You'll want to see these. Inside were transaction summaries, internal emails, and what looked like drafts of contracts. Chloe's name appeared repeatedly, sometimes as a consultant, sometimes as a recipient of large transfers through shell companies I didn't recognize. David's been funneling money, Evelyn said softly, using Chloe as a pass-through to make it appear like small business expenses. He's leveraging her public profile blog partnerships, brand deals to disguise the transfers. I stared at the numbers, disbelief giving way to something sharper. So this wasn't just a relationship, it's a setup. 1. Evelyn nodded. And now that she's pregnant, they have more leverage. Sympathy. A narrative. And if David's accounts are ever frozen, she's already sitting on the clean version of the money. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been in your shoes. 10 years ago, I found out my sister was embezzling from our family's Fermi husband covering for her. I didn't speak up fast enough. I lost everything. And no one believed me because I stayed quiet too long. I swallowed. You think I'll lose if I stay quiet? You already are. I closed the folder carefully. Can I use this? It's not official, but it's enough to build a foundation. And if you want more, I can connect you with someone who can make it official. You just have to be willing to fight. I nodded slowly, heart pounding. I am. We parted without fanfare. She disappeared into the crowd. I walked 3 blocks before pulling out my phone and calling Margaret. She answered on the first ring. Hannah? I need your help. Again. I told her everything. Evelyn, the documents, the money trail. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, we need a legal strategist. Someone who can package this into a timeline, a paper trail, and a case. I thought the same. I'll make the call. In the meantime, document everything. Every conversation, every message. We're going to force the truth to the surface. By the time I returned to Kara's, it was nearly dusk. I went straight to my room and pulled out my notebook again. New findings. 8. David is using Chloe to funnel funds. 9. False business contracts linked to Chloe's blog and influencer accounts. Deg. Evelyn Knox confirms laundering pattern. Action plan. 1. Get formal legal consultation through Margaret. 2. Begin secure storage of evidence off-site backup. 3. Track Chloe's brand deals, potential fronts. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A new message from Chloe. Can we talk? I want to clear the air. Just us. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. I typed back quickly. Sure, tomorrow. Your place. Noon. I didn't plan to confront her. Not yet. I planned to observe. To listen. To give her the rope she didn't even realize she was wrapping around herself. As I closed my notebook, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the windowy face calm, my eyes sharper than they'd ever been. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking clarity. And Chloe had just offered me another piece of the puzzle. Chloe lived in a sleek apartment complex in South Lake Union, the kind with fob entry elevators and minimalist lobbies that smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Her door was already open when I stepped out of the elevator, like she'd been standing there, waiting. She greeted me with a practiced smile and bare feet, her hair tied into a loose braid, as if she were trying to evoke some soft, maternal innocence. Thanks for coming, she said, gesturing for me to enter. I stepped inside. The place was spotless, decorated in warm neutrals and copper accents, too clean for someone so early into pregnancy, unless she was expecting guests often. Or unless she didn't really live here full-time. Can I get you something? Tea? Sparkling water? She offered. No thanks, let's talk. We sat on opposite ends of her linen couch, a low coffee table between us. She looked down at her hands, then up at me, those familiar blue eyes swimming with carefully prepared sorrow. I know I hurt you, she said. And I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I wanted you to know. It wasn't malicious. David and I didn't plan for it to happen. It was confusing. Unexpected, but real. I tilted my head slightly. So real that you needed to wait until my birthday to make the announcement? Her cheeks colored. That wasn't my idea. Mom thought it would be. Symbolic. A way of starting over. Symbolic for who? I asked quietly. Because for me, it was a burial. Chloe blinked, thrown. I just didn't want you to hear it from someone else. I almost laughed. Everyone else already knew. She didn't answer that. Instead, she shifted tactics. I know how it looks. But I love this baby, Hannah, and David. He's committed. He wants to do right by us. Duh. Is that before or after he rerouted tens of thousands into your influencer account? Her entire body froze. It was so quick, so instinctive, that she couldn't fake it. For the first time in years, I saw the truth hit her. I was no longer the naive older sister who smoothed things over and kept family secrets safe. I don't know what you're talking about, she said quickly, too quickly. You do, I replied. And you also know that laundering money through social platforms isn't as subtle as you think. She swallowed. You're misunderstanding. Don't insult me. The air thickened. I let the silence sit. She broke first. What do you want, Hannah? I want the truth, I said. Not your version, not Mom's, the real one. From the moment it started. She stared at me for a long time. Then something in her cracked, maybe not from guilt, but from the pressure of keeping the lies intact. It started last spring, she admitted. We were at that family reunion in Port Townsend. You left early for a work call. David stayed behind. He said he'd always admired me how different I was from you. Said you'd grown distant. That he needed something else. And you gave it to him. I didn't plan to. It was stupid. But then, I found out I was pregnant, and he panicked. He started trying to protect everything, his name, his assets, the company. So he used you. Val. Chloe's lips trembled. We. Stop. My voice was quiet but firm. He used you, Chloe, and you let him because you thought this was your chance to finally win. Her eyes filled with tears. You've always looked down on me. I've always protected you, I said. Even when I shouldn't have. I stood up. I'm not here to argue. I came to see if there was anything left of the sister I once knew. But I see now you buried her long before my birthday. She rose slowly. So what happens now? That depends on you. If you want to come clean, we can fix some of this. Quietly. But if you continue down this road, I won't protect you. I can't. She looked scared. Not of me, but of the consequences. I'll think about it, she said finally. You should, I replied, then walked toward the door. Before I left, I turned back once more. This baby didn't ask for any of this. But you're responsible for the world it's born into. Remember that. Back in the car, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Like the ground under me had finally stopped shifting. Chloe was unraveling. And she knew I was watching now. That night, Margaret called. I've got a name for you, she said. A forensic accountant. Quiet, precise, excellent at finding what others bury. I'll meet him, I said. Good. Because Chloe won't be the only one exposed. I looked deeper into David's files. There are at least 2 other women he's transferred assets to in the last year. I gripped the phone tighter. You think this is a pattern? I think Chloe's just one chapter in a much longer book. And if we're going to bring this house of cards down, we start by pulling the right thread. I nodded, heart racing. And this time, I wasn't afraid to pull. The following Tuesday, I met the forensic accountant Margaret had referred. His office was tucked away in a narrow brick building in Capitol Hill, the kind of place that didn't advertise its services with neon signs or slick front desks. Just a single brass plaque on the door. Elias Trent, CPA. He greeted me with a firm handshake, a quick, assessing glance that told me he already knew more about me than I realized. Margaret had prepared him well. "Come in, Miss Miles," he said. "Let's get to work." His office was spare just a desk, a computer, and walls lined with books and file cabinets. No certificates framed on the wall, no family photos, no clutter. The man meant business. I handed him the folder Evelyn had given me, along with a USB drive containing copies of emails, screenshots of Chloe's influencer transactions, and copies of public business registrations tied to shell companies I'd traced over the last 3 nights. I'd barely slept, but I'd never felt more focused. Elias reviewed everything in silence. The only sound in the room was the low hum of his computer and the occasional shuffle of paper. After 20 minutes, he leaned back and looked at me. "This is impressive," he said. "You've already built the skeleton of a case. What I can do is add flesh to it." I exhaled slowly. "And how long will that take?" "Depends on how deep this goes. But initial review suggests your ex-fiancé has been moving money through layered entities, some legitimate, some not, using your sister as a visible partner. It's cleaner than direct theft but still fraudulent if tied to deception or tax evasion." "And Chloe?" "She's a useful conduit. She legitimizes the transfers with the appearance of brand revenue. But the inflow to her accounts far exceeds her declared sponsorship income. So she knows. She may not have known at the start," he said, "but she knows now." Elias agreed to start formal tracking. Discreet subpoenas, partnership with a quiet tax investigator, and building a paper trail that would hold in both civil and criminal court if needed. I left his office with a growing sense that the path I'd chosen was no longer just personal, it was legal, financial, and possibly public. That night, I called Kara. "Is this becoming too much?" she asked, her voice gentle. "No," I said. "It's becoming exactly what it was always meant to be. A reckoning." She paused. "Are you okay?" I thought about that. About the parts of me that still ached: the betrayal, the humiliation, the gut punch of realizing your family had chosen convenience over truth. But beneath it all, something steadier had taken root. "I'm okay enough," I said. The next morning, I received another unexpected message, this time from David. "We need to talk. Alone. It's important." I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. Every instinct screamed not to. But if there was one thing I'd learned over the past few weeks, it was this. Sometimes you had to let your enemy speak to understand their playbook. I replied with one word. "When?" He suggested a public cafe in Belltown. Neutral ground. I agreed. We met the following day. He looked tired, more haggard than I'd ever seen him. His once pristine suit was wrinkled, tie loosened like he'd given up on appearances. "Hannah," he said, standing as I approached. I sat without greeting. He sighed. "I know you're angry. I deserve that. But there's something you need to know." I waited. He leaned forward, voice low. "Chloe's not the only one. There were others. But she was different. She got in deep. Deeper than she meant to, and now she's scared." "You mean now that it's all coming apart?" He looked away. "She was supposed to be a cover. A way to redirect attention, but she wanted more. The pregnancy? That wasn't planned. At least, not by me." I didn't blink. "And the money?" He rubbed his temples. "I was desperate. I made bad calls. There were deals that went south. I borrowed from places I shouldn't have. She offered to help launder it through her accounts." I studied him. "So now you're what? Confessing?" "I'm warning you," he said. "Chloe's not who you think she is anymore. She's talking to a lawyer. And if she feels threatened, she'll drag you down too." The irony made me smile. "You're warning me about the storm you created?" His face flushed. "I'm trying to stop it before it gets worse." I stood slowly. You should have thought about that before betraying the one person who trusted you. He grabbed my arm, but I pulled away. I'm not your secret keeper anymore, I said. And the truth? It doesn't need protecting, it needs exposing. I left him there, slumped in his chair, the weight of his own unraveling pressing in. Back at Kara's, I sat with my notebook. New notes from David. Chloe may be consulting a lawyer. Pregnancy unplanned, at least by him. He admits to financial laundering under duress. Next steps. Confirm Chloe's legal counsel. Accelerate Elias' timeline. Consult Margaret on preemptive legal protection. I flipped to the front of the notebook where I'd once written my fears. Now, I wrote something new. This ends with truth. Not vengeance. Not collapse. Truth. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. By the end of that week, Elias had uncovered enough to construct what he called an outline of intent. In simpler terms, it meant that David and Chloe's pattern of behavior money funneling, strategic deflection, use of emotional manipulation could be framed not just as personal betrayal but potential conspiracy to commit fraud. I was sitting in Margaret's den, surrounded by folders and highlighted pages, when her phone rang. She stepped into the kitchen to take the call, but I could still hear fragments. Understood. Yes, she's here. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. She returned with her lips pursed, her eyes sharper than before. Chloe's lawyer just filed a petition to secure her financial interest in David's asset, citing the unborn child and long-term cohabitation as grounds. I sat back. So she's making it official. She's making it messy, Margaret corrected. And bold. That petition includes a list of assets you were once connected to indirectly. She's hedging the story. That I was the third wheel. Exactly. I felt the weight of that spin tightening like a noose. Chloe wasn't backing away. She was doubling down. And she was smart enough to know that truth meant nothing if no one heard your side first. So I did the one thing I'd been avoiding. I returned to the office building where David and I had once worked side by side, my ID badge long deactivated, but my face still recognized by the front desk clerk. I wasn't there for David. I was there for Stuart, this former partner in compliance and someone I had always respected. I found him in the hallway just outside the firm's law library, arms full of files, face momentarily frozen in surprise. Hannah? Hi, Stuart. Do you have 10 minutes? He hesitated, then nodded, motioning toward an empty conference room. We sat across from each other, the air thick with everything unsaid. I don't want to cause trouble, I began. But I believe David and Chloe are manipulating more than just emotions. There's money moving where it shouldn't, and I have documentation. Stuart didn't speak. He just stared at me, long enough to make me question everything. Then he leaned in and lowered his voice. You're not the only one who's noticed. But no one wanted to be first to say it out loud. Because he's protected? Because he's strategic. Quiet, careful. But lately, he's been sloppy. Chloe's been coming in more. Asking about clauses. Talking like she's already on the board. She thinks she's part of the firm now? She thinks she's a future partner's wife. And if that partner goes down, she wants legal footing to claim she helped build the empire. I exhaled slowly. So she's hedging more than assets. She's hedging her future story. Yes, and the internal whispers are starting. Then help me make them louder. Stuart didn't commit, but when I handed him a copy of Elias's findings, he took it without protest. Off the record, he said. For now. That night, I returned to Kara's and found her pacing in the living room. You got a visitor today, she said. My pulse quickened. Who? A woman. Late 40s, nice coat, said she was a friend of Chloe's. Left this. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. No name. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Stop now, and no one gets dragged through the mud. I folded it slowly. Threat? Kara asked. A warning, or maybe a bluff. I placed the letter into my notebook. But it means they're feeling pressure. The next morning, I called Elias. Can you trace a courier drop from yesterday to South Capitol? Female, mid-40s, likely legal associate. Give me an hour, he said. By lunch, he'd confirmed she worked at the same firm that filed Chloe's asset petition. I smiled grimly. So now they're playing scare tactics. Which means your case is getting traction, Elias replied. We're almost at critical mass. That night, I wrote a letter of my own. Not to Chloe, not to David, but to the local regulatory board that oversaw David's firm. Anonymously. I submitted a whistleblower notice citing potential misconduct, unauthorized financial redirection, and misuse of firm assets. I attached supporting documents. I signed it, former insider. I sealed it and mailed it myself. Not because I expected swift justice, but because it was time someone officially asked the question. Who is David Ashford really working for? As I walked home under the weight of a Seattle drizzle, I felt something shift in me. Not relief. Not victory. But resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about the truth. About how easily it can be erased when no one is watching. But I was watching now. And I wasn't blinking. 2 days after I mailed the whistleblower letter, the first ripple came not from David or Chloe, but from within the firm. Stuart texted me, he's being audited. Internal, quiet for now, but real. It hit me like a surge of cold air. The truth I'd carefully unboxed was no longer trapped in my notebook. It was moving. Spreading. And I hadn't even turned the volume up yet. Kara and I were having coffee that morning when she caught me staring off into space. You're planning something, aren't you? She asked, half smiling, half worried. I'm planning how to speak, I said. Loudly. I spent the next day drafting a letter, not a legal brief, not a court complaint, but a personal statement. Honest, measured, emotional. I'd read enough victim statements in the news to know that it wasn't just the facts that moved people. It was the voice behind them. I titled it simply, My Story Wasn't a Secret, It Was Ignored. In it, I detailed everything: how David and I were together for 4 years, how Chloe had always been the family's shining star, how she and David had betrayed me not just romantically, but legally, financially, and morally. I explained the social manipulation, the birthday ambush, the way everyone else had known except me. I explained how I discovered the money trail, how I'd met Evelyn and Elias, how I watched the people I loved treat my silence as consent. Then I attached supporting evidence. Not the confidential files, just the ones publicly verifiable. Screenshots, dates, discrepancies. And one photo. A family picture from 2 years ago, where Chloe was leaning against me, smiling like the world hadn't already started to crack. I sent the letter to a local independent journalist. I trusted someone who had once written about financial abuse in professional relationships and who knew how to navigate scandal without sensationalizing it. Her name was Tasha Lynn. Tasha called me that same afternoon. I read your letter, she said. It's powerful. Are you willing to run it? Yes. But I need verification. Background checks, source confirmations. You'll get them, I said. And I don't want anonymity, not this time. There was a long pause. You understand what that means? I do. It means I stop hiding, and so do they. Tasha promised to do her due diligence. Meanwhile, Elias called with new findings. We've traced one of David's shell companies to a real estate deal that overlaps with a private equity firm owned in part by a silent investor, your mother. The words didn't register at first. My mother? She's not on the surface, Elias said. But her trust fund is linked to one of the accounts used in the deal. Small stake, but present. But I sat down slowly, the world tilting slightly. So she was funding part of this? Or at least enabling it. Unwittingly, maybe. But the connection's there. I hung up and stared at the floor for a long time. If she chose to know, then her silence at my birthday dinner had never been about shame. It had been strategy. That night, I drove to my parents' house. Alone. The house looked the same, but I no longer belonged to it. Not truly. My mother answered the door. Hannah, she said, surprised. What are you? We need to talk, I said, stepping inside. In the living room, my father hovered by the fireplace, a drink in hand. My mother sat down slowly, tension climbing her spine. "I know about the real estate account," I began. "The one your trust is linked to. The one funding David's shell company." Her face barely moved, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the couch. "I didn't think it concerned you," she said after a long silence. "It does concern me. Because you stood in that room, watched me get humiliated, and said nothing. Because you let me believe this was about love, about a mistake. But it was never just about love, was it?" She looked at my father. He said nothing. She turned back to me, jaw clenched. "David made us an offer," she said. "After the company lost last year. It seemed safe. Chloe was already involved. We thought it might secure something for the family. And I was collateral." "That's not fair," she snapped. "Number. It's not," I said. "And neither is what's coming next." I left without waiting for a response. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, but I felt clearer than I had in months. The next morning, Tasha called again. "It's going live," she said. "Tomorrow morning. Front page of the online section. We're including a call-out for any whistleblowers or corroborating sources." I nodded. "Thank you. You're brave, Hannah." "I'm ready," I said. The last thing I did that night was text Chloe. "Tomorrow, the story breaks. If you have anything left to say that's real, anything human, you have until midnight." She didn't reply. But I wasn't waiting anymore. Because this time, I wasn't just speaking. I was being heard. The article dropped at 7:05 a.m. By 7:17, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Friends, colleagues, strangers, even a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. They were all reaching out with the same stunned tone, support laced with disbelief. I sat in Kara's kitchen, staring at my screen while sipping burnt coffee, my nerves too raw to taste anything. The headline was stark, unapologetic. Expose, betrayal, laundering, and the price of family loyalty. A Seattle woman breaks her silence. Tasha hadn't changed my words. She'd honored them. And with the supporting evidence, the article didn't feel like gossip. It felt like truth finally being held up to the light. By 8:30, the story had gone regional. By 9 o'clock, a partner from David's firm issued a statement. "We are aware of the allegations and are reviewing all claims internally. We take ethical compliance seriously and will cooperate with any investigative authorities." Stewart messaged me privately. "You've started the avalanche." I wrote back one word. "Good." But the wave didn't stop at David's office. Chloe's influencer account, once a steady stream of curated motherhood musings and softlit selfies, went private by 10 o'clock. I watched in real time as brand sponsors began quietly pulling back. A boutique skincare line removed her from their website. A stroller company deleted her testimonial video. Then came the texts. Not from Chloe. From my mother. "You had no right to drag the family into this. You're blowing this out of proportion. You've embarrassed your father." I stared at the messages, each one more brittle than the last, and didn't reply. Because that was the problem. They still thought silence equaled loyalty. But silence had been the weapon they'd used against me all along. Instead, I called Margaret. "You ready for the fallout?" she asked without preamble. "I've been ready for weeks," I said. "What's next?" "Well, the story's out. That's the court of public opinion. Now we prepare for the legal arena. David's firm might try to bury it with settlements or misdirection. We need to push forward before the momentum slows." I've got Elias working on the asset trail." "Good, and Chloe?" "She's disappeared. Digital ghost. She'll resurface. They always do." Around noon, I went for a walk. Seattle's air was wet with mist, the streets quiet in that oddly insulated weekday way. I turned off my phone and let my feet lead me to places I hadn't visited in years. First, the bookstore on 9th, where David had first asked me to move in with him. Then the bench near Cal Anderson Park, where I'd once read Chloe a college rejection letter and held her while she cried. I ended up at Volunteer Park, sitting under a tree whose roots had cracked the sidewalk with age and quiet strength. That's what I felt like now. A tree that had weathered the storm not unscathed, but still rooted. My phone buzzed again. One voicemail. From an unknown number. I almost deleted it. But curiosity won. I played it on speaker. Hannah, it's Chloe. 1. Her voice was different. Smaller. I read the article. I know you're probably celebrating, or maybe just breathing for the first time. I don't blame you. But I needed to say something before everything becomes lawyers and headlines and things we can't take back. Pause. You were right. About everything. David used me. He flattered me, then tied me to him with fear and false promises. And I let him. Because I was tired of being second. Tired of being overlooked. I thought if I had something of my own, someone of my own, it would finally make me enough. Another pause. A longer one. But it didn't. It broke everything. And I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say it, out loud. I'm sorry. I replayed it twice. Not because I believed her fully, but because there was something in her voice, frayed and stripped of defense, that sounded like the girl I'd once called my best friend. That night, I met with Elias and Margaret again. We reviewed the data, outlined next steps. Freeze requests, discovery filings, potential subpoenas. I signed documents I barely felt, my hand steady. As we wrapped up, Margaret looked at me. You know, she said, this could still get ugly. I'm counting on it, I replied. She smiled faintly. But you've already won something. What's that? Your voice back. And she was right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't speaking for approval, or peace, or appearances. I was speaking because the truth mattered. Even if no one wanted to hear it. Even if it shattered everything. The conference room was quiet except for the clinking of water glasses and the soft shuffle of legal pads. I sat at one end of the long oak table. Margaret beside me, her presence steady like a wall behind my back. Across from us, David sat flanked by 2 attorneys, both of them young, aggressive, and trying too hard not to appear rattled. Chloe wasn't there. This was the preliminary deposition, a civil inquiry into the financial irregularities flagged by the whistleblower complaint Miney and the new evidence Margaret and Elias had helped compile. It wasn't a trial, not yet. But it was official. Recorded. Binding. And for the first time, David would be forced to answer under oath. He looked tired, thinner than before, though his suit was sharp and his posture forced into calm professionalism. But his eyes kept flicking toward me. Measuring. Calculating. I stared back without flinching. The court recorder signaled for the start. Margaret began slowly, methodically, asking about company expenditures, specific transactions, consulting fees paid to Chloe. David danced around them at first, to the best of my knowledge. I don't recall specifics, you'd need to check with accounting. But Margaret wasn't rattled. She moved like a chess master, leading him from vague memories to specific emails. When she dropped the first exhibita document showing a direct fund transfer from the company's operations account to Chloe's influencer brand under a dummy invoice, he visibly flinched. That's not what it looks like, he said quickly. What is it then? Margaret asked, voice cool. A brand partnership. We sponsored her platform to raise visibility. She had fewer than 10,000 followers at the time. David hesitated. It was a forward-looking investment. That. And the other 3 payments? To the same account, same description? David's attorney interrupted. We'd like a brief recess. Margaret smiled. Of course, we've got all day. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. The adrenaline buzzed beneath my skin, but I didn't let it control me. I'd waited too long for this. After the break, we resumed. The second half focused on personal misconduct. Margaret didn't press for emotional wounds. She kept it clinical, focusing on contract breaches, conflicts of interest, misuse of company funds while in a relationship with someone not declared as a formal consultant. Every answer David gave drew him further into the net. By the end of the deposition, he looked cornered. Not collapsed, but close. As we gathered our things, he stood slowly and looked at me. "I didn't think you'd go this far," he said under his breath. "I didn't think you'd betray me," I answered quietly. "And yet, here we are." He opened his mouth as if to reply, but Margaret stepped between us. "This conversation is over," she said calmly. "You'll receive formal updates through counsel." We left without looking back. Outside, the Seattle wind had picked up, tugging at my coat and hair. It was early evening, the sky, a deep gray, city lights blinking into life. I felt drained, but not broken. The kind of exhaustion that comes after a long run, sore, breathless, but proud. Later that night, Chloe called again. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was shakier this time. "They dropped me. All of them. The brands. The agency. I've had to move out of the apartment. David won't return my messages. Mom's furious. I don't know what to do." Another pause. "You won, okay? You were always stronger. Smarter. You just never wanted to see it." She hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Because the truth is, I never wanted to win against her. I wanted us both to win against the lies. But she'd chosen David's approval over my trust, and now she was crumbling in his absence. The next morning, Elias sent an update. 2 regulators had officially opened inquiries into the firm. An IRS liaison had been quietly assigned. And more whistleblower reports were beginning to surface, anonymous at first, but echoing similar patterns: manipulation, questionable spending, pressure to stay silent. The system was finally listening. I stood by the window in Kara's apartment, watching the sun break through a veil of cloud. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I was simply living. There was one more thing left to do. I emailed Chloe. The message was short. "You don't owe me an apology. You owe yourself a decision. Who do you want to become when no one is watching? When no one is choosing for you? It's not too late. But it won't stay that way forever." I hit send and closed the laptop. Margaret called a few minutes later. "They've offered mediation," she said. "Pre-litigation. They want to negotiate. Then we go in with truth on our side," I said. "And what do you want, Hannah?" she asked gently. "Really?" I looked around the room at the notes, the files, the emotional wreckage that had led me here. "I want the silence to end," I said. "Not just for me. For every woman who's been told to be quiet, to smile, to endure. I want to be the one who said no. First. Agree.com. Margaret didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "Then let's give them something they can't ignore." And just like that, I knew. Chapter 12 would not be a conclusion. It would be a beginning. We met in a neutral space downtown, inside one of those minimalist mediation offices that seemed built for modern negotiations and quiet war. The kind of place where smiles were practiced, coffee was lukewarm, and everyone wore suits a shade too dark. Margaret and I arrived early. She was dressed in navy today, calm and composed. I, for once, had chosen to wear white. Clean lines, no jewelry. I wanted to look unshakable. David arrived 10 minutes late, his lawyers in tow. Chloe came separately, dressed in a faded sweater, her hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. I almost didn't recognize her, so stripped of armor, so visibly undone. She didn't look at me. The mediatora-composed woman named Carla explained the rules. No yelling, no threats. Each party would be given time to speak, respond, propose terms. Legal counsel would advise but not interrupt. And, most important, every word was documented, on record. Real. David's lawyers went first. They proposed a settlement. Financial compensation. A non-disclosure agreement. Sealed documentation. They wanted to contain the narrative, to bury the damage. "No," I said simply. Margaret didn't flinch. "We're not here for silence. We're here for accountability." Carla nodded. "Then let's continue." Chloe spoke next. Her voice was low, cracking, like someone forcing words past shame. I didn't know how deep it went. she said. Not at first. But then it became survival. I was in too far. And I convinced myself you didn't care anymore, Hannah. That you'd moved on. I was trying to survive too, I said. But I didn't sacrifice anyone to do it. She flinched but didn't argue. David's turn came. He didn't apologize, he didn't admit. He framed it as misunderstanding. Misaligned expectations. Market-driven decisions. The language of evasion. You lied, I said clearly. You used me, then tried to erase me. You were collateral, he muttered. I was desperate. I was human, I replied. And now you're accountable. Carla guided us toward proposals. Margaret laid out ours. A formal admission of wrongdoing. A public correction to the financial reports. Restitution, not hush money, but a clear paper trail of correction, and no non-disclosure agreements. The truth would remain public. There was silence for a long time. Then, shockingly, Chloe agreed. I'll sign it, she said. I'll cooperate. Fully. David's lawyers stiffened. We'll need to review. Then, review fast, Chloe interrupted. I'm done lying. Something shifted in that room, not victory, not forgiveness, but clarity. Chloe and I locked eyes for the first time in months. There was no love there. But there was recognition. The kind that comes after a long war, when two soldiers realize they both lost something irreparable. We signed the agreement 3 days later. The story made another round in the press, this time with updates. David's firm placed him on indefinite leave. Chloe issued a formal apology on her social media and then deleted every post after it. My inbox overflowed with messages, some from people I knew, some from strangers who read my story and found pieces of themselves in it. But the one message that mattered most came not in a reply, but in a note. Handwritten. Slipped into my mailbox. You reminded me that silence isn't strength. Thank you. M. I never figured out who M was. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone who read quietly from the sidelines. But that note meant more than any article or headline. It was proof that stories echo. A month later, I stood in front of a modest crowd at a women's advocacy event. Kara had insisted I speak. I hadn't planned on saying much, but when the mic came to me, the words came easily. I used to think survival meant staying quiet, keeping peace, smiling while my world cracked beneath me. But I was wrong. Survival is not silence. Survival is voice. Action. Truth. They clapped, but more than that, they listened. And that's all I ever wanted. To be heard. After the event, Margaret and I had dinner. She raised her glass across the table. To beginnings, she said. To truth, I answered. To this day, I don't know what became of David. Or if Chloe ever rebuilt her life. I stopped checking. I stopped needing to know. Because I had rebuilt mine. Not from the ashes, but from the foundation that was always there. Me, whole, strong, unbroken, finally, free. This story is a powerful reminder that silence is not always golden, especially when it comes at the cost of your dignity, truth, or justice. Too often, women are taught to be agreeable, to keep peace even when it breaks them, to smile through betrayal and pretend nothing hurts. But Hannah's journey shows us that our voices carry power. That standing up for ourselves, even when it's terrifying, is the first step toward healing. It's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your name, your worth, and your place in the world. If you've ever been dismissed, silenced, or betrayed, know this. Your story matters. You don't have to stay in the shadows to be safe. You can speak, you can act. And when you do, you light the path for others. To every woman listening, may you find the courage to tell your truth, no matter who it challenges.